My brothers and sisters, from time to time in our lives, we meet certain people who it seems have done everything. In the time span where it seems any other person would do a couple things, these people have done so much more. The woman whom we celebrate today, who lived some 700 years ago, was one of those people. She was a wife and a mother, had 8 children, raised a wonderful family. But God was not done with her at that point in her life. After the death of her husband, she felt a deeper call, another call, to go and give her heart entirely to the Lord. And so she became a consecrated religious, founded an order, was a mystic, communicated God's love to many people at a very difficult time for the church. And so as we honor the life of St. Brigid, we might wonder, well, why did God give her so many graces, and why hasn't he given me or you or so many other people so many graces? Well, the thing is, St. Brigid's difference from many of us is not that God gave her more abundant graces, but that perhaps she was more willing to respond to the graces God was giving her. You see, all too often it happens that God comes to our lives, makes his presence known, makes his invitation felt, and rather than following gladly, we defer. We say, not now, or I'm not the right person, or I have other things to accomplish before I follow the will of God. And so we put off what God desires of us. And we think in doing so that we're taking care of ourselves, of our happiness, of our well-being. But it is not so. Because it is not protecting our own sphere by our own understanding that gains us happiness. It's like St. Brigid being bold in stepping out, following God's will at all times, and trusting that even if it calls us to go out into the wilderness, to places and ways of life we do not quite understand, that God's will calls us not to destruction and suffering, but rather to a deep and abiding joy. If that is our certainty, my brothers and sisters, we will follow God wherever he leads us. And it might seem at times that we're like the Israelites, wandering in the desert, seeking that promised land God has called us to. And it might seem that we come to obstacles in the road like that great river was. By our own ways, there's no way to get through it. But God's ways are not our ways. And so we need to trust and follow, not putting these obstacles in the way of the Lord. And if we have obstacles in our way, it's one of two things. Perhaps God is inviting us to go in a different direction. Perhaps God is inviting us to wait for him to open the path so we can continue the journey forward. What should mark our journey is what marks the life of St. Brigid. And it's what Jesus holds up for us in the gospel today. The importance of faith. The importance of trusting wholeheartedly in the Lord. No obstacles, no excuses, just placing ourselves before the Lord and saying, yes, I will follow. I may not understand the way, I may have other plans, but I'll put them in your hands and I will follow. We talk often about a crisis of vocations, but there's no real crisis. God continues to call. The crisis is in disciples who aren't willing to trust this good and loving God will call them not to suffering and destruction, but rather to joy and to eternal life. As we continue with this Mass today, let's make that our prayer. Through St. Brigid's intercession, that we may always be willing to listen to God's invitation, even when it seems to us it's inconvenient to do so. Because in listening and following, we will find joy.